Well, hi, everyone. I want to welcome you to Nature Connects. Nature Connects is Massachusetts TNC's webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, and influencers and our partners from New England and around the world. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Massachusetts State Director and your host, Deb Markowitz. And here at the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, we're dedicated to creating a healthier world for all. We work locally and globally using innovative science and scalable, long-lasting solutions to tackle the most complex environmental challenges facing our warming planet. We know that what we do here in Massachusetts to protect nature will mean a better future for people and planet. So we've got a really fun program for you today. We'll be chatting with Rene Wendell. Rene is a land steward for Massachusetts and TNC in Massachusetts. Rene's going to take us on a virtual field trip to the Berkshires. There is so much going on in the spring. Maybe you've noticed this. And he's going to show us skunk, cabbage, bloodroot, wild ginger, and many more plant species. And he's going to tell us why these species are significant. He'll also answer all of your questions about the many wildflower and plant species that you may be spotting this spring. So a little bit about Rene. He's the son of a trapper, taxidermist, hunter, fisherman, and amateur etymologist, which is to say that he was destined to be an outdoorsman himself. He received his Bachelor's of Science degree from the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, and he worked 13 years for the trustees as the property manager at Bartholomew's Cobble. In his current role at TNC, he helps manage close to 10,000 acres of preserves. He enjoys ice fishing, looking for arrowheads, bird watching, and dandelion salads, especially this time of year. As you think of questions for Rene, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And I just want to thank you all for joining us today. And Rene, let's dive in. How are you doing?
I'm nervous, Deb, quite honestly. I've heard that there's 270 people signed up for this. That is absolutely crazy. It's a little bit out of my wheelhouse.
Well, it's a sign that people really are excited to get outdoors and hear what you have to say. And you should all know, when we have done some staff events over the winter, Rene has done these virtual bird walks with us, and they're really fun, even when we don't really see a lot of birds. So
that's a tough one. A virtual bird walk's a tough one. So hopefully this one will be a little easier. I used to do these types of programs back in the day, and it would be a walk through the woods, and I'd have bird sounds to fall back on, pine warblers up in the canopy, black-throated green warblers. There might be deer tracks or coyote tracks in the mud, but don't have any of that. So I'm going to go for it. And I want to give a disclaimer, Deb, before we get into this. I'm not an expert. I mean, with 270 people on this thing, there's got to be some experts in there. And if you don't get the answer to the question that you asked, I think we'll put my email up, and I'll try to get you the information as quickly as I can. I'm just like an average all around kind of naturalist. I know a little bit about a lot of things, and that's how I like it. I usually show people, so this is a little bit different for me.
Yeah, and you're all in for a treat, because what we did is we videoed Rene in the wild. So you'll see little clips of the videos, and then we'll be able to talk about them. So this is gonna be a lot of fun.
So yeah, just before we get going, I just want to give credit where credit is due. So a lot of these little snippets and tidbits that I'm going to talk about with the wildflowers come from two books, really. Of course, wildflowers, you start with the field guides. But once you get past, what the plant looks like, you want to know a little something meaty about the plant, right? So I want to show you guys this one right here. This is, you see this one? The Secrets of Wildflowers by Jack Sanders. This book's phenomenal. A field guide, skunk cabbage, will give you like one page, like half a page, a snippet. Jack gives you like 4 pages on the folklore, what animals eat it, poems, poetry. It's amazing. It's an amazing book. And then once you get into Jack's book, then you want, the Bible. You want something really meaty. Then this one right here, Spring Wildflowers by Carol Gracie. I was actually lucky enough to meet Carol. I got this baby's autograph. And this is, like I say, like Jack's Jack's is like if you read Harry Potter and you're like, wow, that's amazing, I should read something else, and then you get the Iliad right here. So this is a lot of, it's meaty. I highly recommend both of those.
That's a great metaphor. Folks, if you haven't noticed in the chat, we've put the names of both of these recommended books.
Yeah. So those are the 2 books. And yeah, I guess we could get going. Yeah, so we got first up on our list is blunt-lobed hepatica. This is like the showstopper, you know, after a hard winter. Everybody's had a hard winter this year. This is terrible, terrible winter. But you get out into this is one of the first ones to show up. This one just amazes and delights you the minute you see it. You look at this plant and you're like, everything is good with the world. It's gonna be all right. So cue the clip, Liz. Oh boy.
We're getting the sound. Hang on.
Sound.
Oh, we'll try one more time.
Just a minute, I'll get the sound.
Yeah. I mean, I could say other things, I guess. Yeah. So
well, wait, actually, Rene, I have to tell you, I love those flowers. I didn't know what they were called. I called them, I think my kids must have made up a name like Blue Star or something. And we planted them and transplanted them in our yard because they are the first flowers, and the kids would always run out to see if they had started yet in the official end of winter in their mind.
Jack Sanders' books tells you about all the different names that these plants are known by too. So you're not the only one, Deb, that's named their own flowers.
The first, but it's not the first. My favorite is the first coming up. We'll get to that one, but this is blunt-lobed hepatica, like I said. You see these big blunt lobes here? If anyone's done any butchering, they know livers are shaped like lobes. It's pretty cool. This plant is an evergreen. So all year long, this giant green leaf is making food for the plant throughout the winter. And then as the winter wanes, these leaves will die back and make some new ones. You can see some new ones already starting to come up here in the middle. You can also see these hairy stems. That's another adaptation for this plant to protect itself against early frost, since it is one of the first ones to come up. You know, these blunt lobes, they die back, and when they're brown and they die back, they're just like a liver. But this plant comes in a wide range of colors. This is a light violet. Here's a dark one over here. You see this one, Ava? Ava's doing the filming, by the way. Ava, say hello.
Hello.
Ava's our Student Conservation Association partner. She's working with us this year. Really cool. Here, check this out, Ava. See, here's a darker one with a lobe, and they look like livers. So here you go. Look at this thing, right? Looks just like a liver. So there's this thing called
they mentioned liver
doctrines, which is really
and butchering.
Crazy. So back in the day, people used to believe that God was a just God, right? And that he wouldn't make these ailments for people in the world unless there was a cure. There was always a cure for the disease. And people believed that if a plant looked or resembled something in the body, then that was obviously what you used to treat the plant. So this was it's still used as a homeopathic remedy to treat liver ailments and gallbladder and stuff like that. It doesn't really work. Obviously the signature of doctrines is a good idea, but it doesn't necessarily work. We know this with today's medicine. Another cool thing about this plant is that it relies heavily upon ants. It's called micrame or something. I don't know how to pronounce it. But anyway, ants come and they'll gather up the seeds of this plant, right? And what the plant does, it puts a little iliosome, it's called, a little seed, like a little sugar capsule or coating around the seed. And that entices the ants to gather up the seeds of this plant and go 5 feet, 10 feet, 50 feet to its nest, and then bring it underground, right? They eat the iliosome, but they don't eat the seed. They can't get to the seed. So what do the ants do? They take the seed to their garbage chamber, which is filled with leaves and dead ants and fungus and all sorts of stuff that the ants don't need. in the seeds. So what did the ants just do? The ants just pulled the seed underground and planted it in a compost heap. It's amazing. And we don't realize here in the Northeast, like the 36% of all these woodland plants rely heavily upon ant pollination and seed dispersal. So here it is, blunt-lobed hepatica, one of my faves. It's a beauty.
I had no idea that ants were so important. I knew they were important for peonies, but I didn't realize they also were so important for some of these other plant species. Very cool, Rene.
Yeah, indeed. And did you guys hear the hermit thrush in the background? I didn't even notice that when I was filming this, but anyway,
I was so focused on you, I didn't hear it, but maybe folks who were watching at home heard it.
Yeah, one of my favorites, a hermit thrush. Man, just you know, fills the soul. So how about we do the next one? Move on.
All right.
All right, here's my absolute favorite. So you probably hear I'm saying this is my favorite, but this one is my absolute favorite. And I'm going to tell you a bit about it, but I'm going to tell you a little story. And Liz and I went back and forth whether or not I should tell it, but I'm just going to tell it. Listen, so back in the day when we were kids, we had a swamp down the street from us, right? And all us young boys, we'd go down there and play in the swamp and come back soaking wet, much to the chagrin of our mothers. But my buddy had a little sister that always wanted to tag along. She always wanted to tag along. And it would drive him nuts. You know, we didn't care so much, but it drive him nuts, right? He wanted to be with his friends, you know? So one time we were down there, she came and he rolled her around in this skunk cabbage, and she smelled terrible. And she went crying home. And I'm sorry, I think we all laughed. I don't know if she's permanently scarred. I'm still friends with her on Facebook. She's a very nice person. But I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have told it. Anyway, let's cue the slide.
All right, everybody, this is my favorite wildflower that there is. It's skunk cabbage. All right, I mentioned when we were at the hepatica that there was another plant that comes up first. This is our first wildflower. It's not coltsfoot, it's not trailing arbutus, it's this guy. I've seen the little noses of these flowers coming up, you know, in February in the wetlands around southern Berkshire. So many things to talk about by this plant. First off, it can be up to 200 years old. A plant, wow. A vascular plant, not a tree, skunk cabbage. Just an amazing, amazing plant. This right here, Ava, check it out. So this is the flower. These are the green leaves, but this is the spathe right here. The flower, can you see that? Are you getting that, Ava? Mm-hmm. You see that? It's actually a pretty flower in there. So anyway, that's the flower itself. This red bit is the spathe. All right, so when then this thing comes up in February, March, we're still talking about a frost. We're talking about heavy freezes still, right? So a technique for this survival of this plant and its flower is it makes its own heat. It's called thermogenesis. All right, so in and around this spathe and on the inside, it could be upwards around 70 degrees inside this spathe to protect, you know, that delicate flower in there. Obviously, it doesn't need it now, so the spathe is more opened up. But when it first comes up, it's nice and tight. This plant's really, really cool. So think about the timing of the year when it comes up. It's February, it's March, tough winter. You had a lot of animals dying of starvation throughout the winter. Those carcasses get locked in snow and ice. So this time of year, they're starting to thaw out, right? So this plant right here doesn't provide any nectar, all right? It's what this plant essentially is a rotting carcass mimic, all right? This plant produces a couple of chemicals that are called skatol and cadaverine, and they're the same chemicals you find in rotting meat, so that's why it really stinks. Anyway, so who pollinates this, right? Flies. You know, a fly will come in here thinking of if they're gonna have a party on a rotting carcass, you know, carrion beetles, and they walk all around on the inside of that flower, find no nectar, well, find no rotting carcass. The bees or anything that visits this does not find any nectar. They'll fly to the next one, and that's how it gets pollinated. So this beautiful plant is, you know, pretends it's a rotting carcass. So Skunk cat.
So now we've got a liver, we've got a rotting carcass.
Yeah, I
your
didn't
analogy
realize.
here.
Well, it is spring. I mean, that's so true. And if you think about spring too, is like, why are these plants out there? They're taking advantage of all these like different techniques. Like there's no trees, there's no canopy in the forest right now, right? So that's why all these woodland flowers are doing what they need to do right now. So sunlight's penetrating right to the forest floor. They come out as quickly as they can. There's no other competition from any other flowers. You know, like think about late summer, you got all these goldenrods and asters, and the fields are full of flowers. This time of year, if you're a bee, honeybee, bumblebee, fly, you don't have a lot of choice. So that's a technique that these flowers utilize, is the timing of the year.
Rene, did I hear something last spring? You know, it was the beginning of the pandemic. People were inside, and there were a lot of people who were like going out to pick wild leeks and ramps. And I think a few people picked skunk cabbage and got really sick by eating it instead.
Yeah.
Being confused about it. Did you hear anything about that where you lived? And
no, but why don't we talk about it?
It would be a bad idea to eat skunk cabbage, right?
It is edible. And I love wild edibles, and it's one of the ones I haven't eaten because some of them you have to cook to get rid of the oxalic acid, oxalic crystals. Skunk cabbage you actually have to dry. And Native Americans used to use it, and it's been used in poultices. It's been used herbally for a long time, and you can't eat it. Bears love it. Bears come out of hibernation and dig up the skunk cabbage and eat a ton of it. And bears have, bears have this buildup all winter, right?
Yeah.
You're a bear, you've been sleeping, you have a buildup. So you need to get rid of what's inside you. You know, you have a giant, what they call fecal plug. And seriously. So if you're in the woods this time of year and you see
I hope you're not eating lunch, everybody.
but they use this to help with that. But ramps. So yes, know what you're doing. Especially know what you're doing. And ramps, that's a whole nother topic. You know, a lot of these plants are edible, wild edibles, like spring beauty that comes up, but there's just there's so few of it. Like, why would you do it? I mean, I've tried things like wild ginger and stuff like that, but you got to do it in small amounts. So ramps, I have ramps every year, but what I do is I harvest it ethically. Ramps come up with two leaves. You take one leaf, you go from one patch to the next patch. You're really delicate in the system. What happens though with ramps is that it's there's becoming a market for it. So local restaurants in the Berkshires, some kitschy restaurants are selling it. I know one supermarket in the Berkshires is selling it. And what guys that sell it, when there's a market and there's money to be made, they don't walk delicately in the forest. They'll go in with a shovel and dig up whole, like ramps come up in like a little mound here and a mound there. They'll dig up a whole mound and they'll really hurt the populations. It takes a long time for a big population of ramps to get going. So do it ethically, know what you're doing. Yeah, skunk cabbage. Oof,
and actually,
don't even mess with that one.
Lolly Cochran wrote in the chat that people also pick false hellebore thinking they're ramps and they get very sick. So that could be what I remember hearing and about. So that's interesting.
Yep.
But I never knew about this flower. This is very cool.
I mean, if you want to know, if you want to make sure you're having a ramp, pick it and it's going to smell like an onion. It's not going to smell like a skunk. Don't eat it if it smells like a skunk. Right.
Okay, good.
What will we do the next one?
In fact, if anything smells like a skunk, that's a sign, don't eat it, no matter what it is.
So yeah, talk about another showstopper, you know. So you walk through the woods and you get the hepaticas and they're small little things, and sometimes they're in clumps. But these babies, when they're out, they're just open up to the sunshine, and you can't miss these big white stunners in the forest. So let's hear what I got to say about this plant.
Well, it's hard to beat bloodroot for a dazzling spring wildflower. Check these puppies out, Ava. Amazing. So bloodroot, I just love bloodroot. Look at this leaf. It's amazing. So an adaptation that this plant has when it first comes up, is this single leaf. You see how it kind of wraps around? You know, this is a bright sunny day, so on a not so bright sunny day, you know, this bud wouldn't be open, or when it's first coming up in the spring, it wouldn't be open. This leaf like wraps around the bud to protect it from the spring frosts. But this sucker is a really delicate plant. Look at this one right here. You can see that, you know, the wind and stuff, and maybe that rain we had last week. Oh, look, check it out. You know what I was saying about protecting the bud? You see how that's wrapped around it? Perfect example of that. But anyway, these plants are so delicate. Some wind or some rain really knocks them off. You can see the petals on the ground. Some of these flowers of bloodroot only last a few days, but it's enough to get the job done. Here's one that's totally gone. That's, you can see actually that's like the little seed thing the pod is going to develop in there. Bloodroot. Why do they call it bloodroot? If you were to cut this, you know, this leaf, and then the blood bleeds. It's almost like an orangey kind of yellowy, not necessarily red, but juicy type of plant. It has a ton of juice in it. And again, that signature of doctrines I was talking about with the hepatica, this was used to treat blood diseases and ulcers and lacerations and stuff like that. Doesn't work actually too much. Bloodroot can be toxic. But there is a really cool anecdotal thing that there's an ingredient in Viadent toothpaste called sanguarine, all right, that they get from bloodroot, and that actually if you use it, they say it helps fight plaque. But this is bloodroot, and certainly, you know, I keep saying this, that they're all my favorites, but this is one of my favorites too. All right.
We're getting a tour of your favorites, I would bet, Rene.
So a lot of this is in Jack Sanders' book. He's the one that talks about the Viadent toothpaste. Who knows this? You know, the research that went into some of these two books is incredible.
But note that it's poisonous. So you have to actually extract the thing, rather than, people at home shouldn't be just rubbing it, right?
Yeah, don't brush your teeth with blood.
Yeah. My kids would pick it and then like henna their hands with it. And then we found that it was protected. It was like state protected. And it was like, don't pick that, bloodroot.
You know, we got to go easy on kids. You know what I mean? So, you know, let them pick goldenrod in the fall when there's a ton of it, you know, but you can't always tell them no all the time. The worst thing you can do is just keep telling your kids no and beat them up for every bad, poor decision they made. Pretty soon the kid's going to stop asking, and they're going to pick up the video game controller, and they're going to play on Facebook, and then they're no longer interested in nature. So, you know, if a couple of bloodroots were picked, you know, for the cause, their mom now is head of Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts. So I think it's all right in the long run. It's equaled out, Deb.
Thank you. I was feeling guilty. No. Oh, I love these are my favorite.
Really? Yeah.
Well, listen, trillium. I assume trillium are coming, not to do spoiler alert.
Yeah, don't spoil it.
Okay, I won't spoil it.
Of course, trillium's coming. Yeah. So, yeah, trowel lily. So, you know, hepatica starts to wane. Everything has a season. Hepatica is still going, but you're finding less of them. The bloodroots, all the, you know, the petals have fallen off because of the heavy rains. And now you got these guys coming, the trowel lilies. These things, yeah, I know why they're your favorite. They got everything, right? They got they got yellow. Look at that mottled leaf. They say that kind of resembles like the markings of a trout. That's probably why they got one of the names for. But anyway, let's cue this one, Liz, please.
All right, what we have here is trout lily. This is just one of the most beautiful little guys in the woods right now. Amazing flower, all right? Really important food, really important plant for bumblebees. So bumblebees coming out in the spring, especially queens, want to start forming new nests. So they need a food source for their workers, and they'll take the pollen from this plant. You can see the pollen right in there, right? And they'll feed it to their workers. Of course, nectar is always a good energy source, and she'll take it back to her nest. Really important for our local pollinators, bumblebees. You know, not a lot of choices out here in the spring for our early arrivals. These are really cool plants in that they really important part of the soil community, all right? So if you look at this thing, you see all these little single plants. What's happening here
is only about 1% of trout lilies in an area bloom at any one given time. You see how this one has 2 leaves? All right, these single-leafed ones are actually like off the mother plant. There's a little thread-like thing that develops underneath the soil, and then another little rootlet, a corm starts, pops up a single leaf. You know, this starts making energy. It'll throw a little one, throw another one up. So it gets to be like in a given year, 9 of these little plants can start up, and then, you know, the little thread-like disappears, and then it becomes a full-fledged plant itself. You know, some of these colonies of trout lilies can be quite big in areas, and they could be decades old, you know. Well, that's what I read anyway. But there you go, trout lily.
I'd always wondered about all of the single leaf ones, and I had always, you know, I make up answers to things myself. I always assumed it was, you know, next year it's going to have 2 leaves and be a flower. Just kind of like the raspberries, right? You've got the raspberries that don't have raspberries because next year they'll have the raspberries on them.
Takes a lot of energy for a plant to make flowers and then the associated seeds, right? So some of these new plants take a year or 2 to get going. So they'll send out that one leaf. That one leaf soaks up all the sun and gets the energy, brings it back down into their rootstock. And then, like you're saying, maybe the next year it has enough energy to send up the flower. Exactly.
So,
And I saw a whole carpet of these
oh,
with spring beauties yesterday. Ava and I were out at our Coles Brook Preserve in Middlefield, walking some boundaries, and it was just a delight to see.
so is it true that sometimes they're called dogtooth lilies, or is that a different thing altogether? Or
Yep. Yeah. The dogtooth violets, they call them. Yep.
dogtooth violets?
It's not in the violet family.
Well, yeah, good. So it's the same thing. So dogtooth violet, but it's a lily, not a violet.
Mhm.
But I can sort of see the dogtooth about it, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, these books, the ones I showed you, they talk all about these names and why they came about and stuff. It's really interesting, and it's fun to read about it, see it in the field, or see it in the field, come back and read about it. I mean, I still, like, I haven't even been through all of Carol Gracie's book yet, and I got that thing like 8 years ago, you know. So always, that's a beautiful thing with nature. There's always something to learn.
Nice.
Wild ginger. So I mentioned a little earlier that I actually tried this one. So the good thing about wild ginger is it comes out from roots. There's a bunch of roots, and you can break off a little root stock. And I particularly large patch next to the apartment I lived in down in Sheffield for a while. So I took a few of the roots, and I saw like an old recipe where they used to candy the roots in a sugar syrup. So I made myself some little candies. They were all right. You know, it's not like, you know, going to the supermarket and getting some candied ginger root. You know, I did it once was good. You know, so now I can speak to it. But yeah, let's see what I got to say about this one. Cue it up, Liz.
So this one's a pretty cool one, Ava. Check it out. This one is wild ginger, and we got a little flower here, but let me show you the leaf right here. So this is just starting out, and you see it's a heart shape. Here's the flower coming out right from the root of the plant. So this plant is like a lot of the other 2 we talked about earlier, right? It has a hairy stem to help protect itself against the winter frosts, you know, late season frosts. All right, and then this flower, see this little beauty? Often overlooked because sometimes it hides underneath these leaves. These leaves will get nice and much bigger. They're lovely for a garden. If you get them from a reputable dealer, you don't want to ever take plants from the wild. But that little flower, similar to what I was talking about with skunk cabbage, it's got the red color, you know, looks like rotting meat. This plant relies upon carrion beetles and little flies to pollinate it. It also, just like hepatica, the seeds later in the fall are dispersed by ants. It's also a tasty little plant, though it's not that common anymore. It used to be more common. It's not related to ginger, but the root has a similar flavor to wild ginger, and you can candy the roots and you can do flavored drinks and stuff with it, but I wouldn't recommend it. You know, these plants are starting to, you know, they're a little bit rare now because our woodlands are disappearing and stuff. So it's best just to observe them and then buy your ginger at the store.
I've never seen one of those flowers before. So they're really subtle because they're underneath the wide leaf, it sounds
Yeah,
like.
totally nondescript, hidden in there. You know, they don't want to show you. They want to just make sure the ants find them, you know. But yeah, you know, and the colonists and the Native Americans, you know, there wasn't a lot of sweet things, you know, you had honey and stuff. So when you know, ginger was a fun little thing to add to your repertoire. So, with development and everything like this, a lot of these little populations go, and you find with spring ephemerals, they're generally in pockets. They're not throughout the whole landscape. Pine trees are almost everywhere. Maple trees almost everywhere. But these spring ephemerals need like little microclimates, little pockets of sunshine. In fact, if there is a pine tree, they're not going to grow there because a pine tree is evergreen and they won't get the light. So, a poor placement of a subdivision and stuff can wipe out a whole population of things. So even though our forests, we've gotten a lot of forests, they're on the increase. But development still affects these plants. So I wouldn't harvest them for edibles. There's plenty of stuff later in the season that come up. You know what? Stinging nettle. Get yourself some stinging nettles. Cream of stinging nettle soup. That's delicious. There's a ton of stinging nettle. But let's how about there you go, Deb. Here it is.
Oh, it is. But for the stinging nettle, you need good gloves.
Yeah, or just take one on the chin. It only lasts a little bit.
Yeah, my favorite. The red ones and the white ones are also are also really wonderful.
Yeah, and then on the higher elevations, in some places, painted trillium.
Right, the painted. That's what I'm thinking of. The white with the little red in it.
Yeah, absolutely stunning. Yep. So everybody, here's Deb's favorite.
My other favorite.
Got a couple of cool plants here, right here. This is going to be blue cohosh. This makes a nice purple berry later in the fall. Its flowers are kind of a little yellow and kind of nondescript for a spring ephemeral. But this guy's pretty neat. Everybody loves trillium, also called divinity flower because of its tri-nature. So you got 3 petals, 3 leaves, 3 petals, 3 sepals, and you can even divide the pollen grains and stuff into 3. It just seems like 3 is the magic number for this plant. But not a ton to say other than, again, a rotting carcass mimic the lovely trillium. I've had my friends go down and smell this plant and take a big whiff, tell them it smells great, but it really kind of stinks. But certainly is beautiful. Trillium.
You really have the rotting carcass theme to this. My apologies, everybody who's eating lunch. We should have put a trigger warning.
Yeah, and it's fun. Everybody expects that plant to be like, oh my God, it must smell so lovely like a rose. And then oftentimes it doesn't smell much like anything, but if it's a fresh one, it doesn't smell all that rose-like.
I want to note that Russ Cohen made a comment about the ginger, and he said, while I enjoy sniffing the gingery aroma of wild ginger stems, I no longer promote eating it because of possible toxicity. And there's an article in Wikipedia about it. So there you go.
Yeah, and Russ Cohen, man, are you really on this, Russ? You're killing me. Actually, so I get goosebumps, man. So Russ Cohen, he is the guru. If Russ says it's true, it's true. All right. I had Russ do a program for me down at the preserve I used to run down in Sheffield. And then after that, I was hooked. I said, this guy, he knows his stuff. He's amazing. So that's when I got going into wild edibles, and so I'll do the Russ. So Stinking Benjamin. That's another name for that plant too. Yeah. So and I would encourage people, so once this pandemic stuff slows down and you can get back out there, Russ leads programs all across the state. And if you can go on a trip with Russ, I would highly recommend.
There was also a comment from Rana Erickson who noted that yellow trillium actually smells like crushed coriander, which is really nice and not at all like rotting flesh. So if you have the choice to smell a red one or a yellow one, pick yellow.
All right. Dutchman's breeches. All right, these are pretty cool. So in Jack Sanders' book, he talks about how in Victorian age, that there was actually, I think it was a preacher that mounted a campaign to have the name changed of this plant because he thought it was rude to name a plant after somebody's pants, their britches. So I thought that was pretty funny. All these little anecdotes in Jack's book are amazing. But so let's cue this one up, Liz.
Good. All right, so this one right here is Dutchman's breeches right here. Cool little flower. You guys might recognize these as these are wild bleeding hearts. Really pretty cool plant. It's actually composed of 4 petals. 2 of them are fused for the outside that create the, you know, the pantaloons, the pants of the plant, Dutchman's breeches. And then inside there's 2 that you really can't see in there, right here, that protect like the lips of the plant. So why they're shaped like this, you know, they don't really know, but this fused nature helps protect the pollen from wind and rain. Insects have to go in there and really actively seek out the nectar. It's said that the bumblebee is one of the only one that can get its tongue way up to the back where the end of the pantaloon is. You guys, columbine does the same thing, but columbine's red, and that attracts you know, ruby-throated hummingbirds. Some insects have been known to cheat though, just like in columbine, they nibble off the end and they steal the nectar without pollinating the plant. But certainly one of our prettiest, Dutchman's breeches.
That's nice. We have some in our back garden, and they just came by themselves, but we did get a comment from Margaret Sisson, I think is maybe how you say the last name. And Margaret suggests that we should speak about the ethics of collecting native wildflowers to plant in our yards. They don't transplant well and shouldn't be picked or dug. They're in too short supply now. And kids can learn that picking isn't the best way to love a special flower, or mom can learn that too. And native wildflowers can be bought at a reputable nursery is the comment.
Yeah, and she's exactly right. You know, I just don't like to, beat up on the kids. I remember a butterfly landed on my finger once when I was a kid, and my neighbor came over and just started yelling. And my mother would tell the story, and she's like, "It has germs," So it's, what was that? Last Child in the Woods. I read that book. That was an amazing book. But she is right. And transplanting, a lot of these plants have a really symbiotic relationship. They need a lot of the soil that's around them for the mycorrhizae that are in the soil. So when you transplant a plant, it doesn't have that, and it won't do well. Especially orchids, people love to transplant orchids, the lady slippers from the woods, and they just die, and it's not worth it, So yeah, and there's plenty of stuff. If you like the look at Dutchman's breeches, all you got to do is go and get some bleeding hearts. Another one of those that we have in our woods around here is squirrel corn, and that's a really cool one too. It's a little bit different than that one, a little bit more round. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I have those. They just to warn you, if you do get them and from like the nursery and you bring them home, they're going to take over. So you need to give them a lot of space. Because I made the mistake of planting them in a place where I had a pretty controlled bed of perennials, and every year I'm digging them out and so yeah, let me note that we're getting a lot of comments in the chat, but please put your questions in the Q&A box. We're just about ready to really go to your questions. So please do. You'll see the Q&A, just put them in there and then we'll get to them as Rene finishes. Yeah, this is my other favorite, Jack-in-the-pulpits. They're so much fun.
Yeah. This is the last one I'm going to talk about. So lucky for everybody, my little weird clips are done, but Jack-in-the-pulpit, it wasn't out when I went down, and I filmed most of that at Bartholomew's Cobble because I'm so familiar with the place and they're really close together. But this one wasn't out yet. But Jack-in-the-pulpit, I really wanted in here because I really wanted to end on an awesome note, man. This plant is just crazy impressive. So like skunk cabbage, it has a spathe. You can see that outer spathe that's protecting the flower inside, right? So Deb, this is not going to come as a shock to you, but it's harder in life to be a female than it is a male. All right. I know it's 270 people on here. I'm bound to get some flack, but I think we could all pretty safely say that's the truth, right? So it takes a lot of energy for a plant to create a flower and then the subsequent seeds, right? So every single Jack-in-the-pulpit starts off as a male. So in its life, starts off as a male, puts the leaves out, collects the sunshine, photosynthesis, and then it stores up the energy in its little corm down below its little root. And then when it finally gets enough energy to make a flower, it'll send the flower up. And then at that point, it's turned itself into a female. So now it's a female plant, right? Everything's all well and good, and a white-tailed deer comes along and then chomps off the whole top of this plant. Now the plant doesn't have any more energy. It goes back to becoming a male. It can switch its sex. So pretty amazing. It's also pretty crazy. So Jack-in-the-pulpits are the males, Jill-in-the-pulpits are the females. All right. So when a Jack-in-the-pulpit gets an insect in there to pollinate it, right? Insect gets in there, goes around on the flower, and then there's a little trap door down at the bottom of that spathe where the insect can wriggle itself out and free, right? Now it has all sorts of pollen on it, right? Now it flies to a female plant, right? And this is where it gets a little vicious. So the female plant really wants to be pollinated, all right? So what happens is the insect flies into the spathe, right? Wiggles around, it's pollinating the flower, but there's no trap door for the insect to escape. So lots of times you'll have a little buildup of insects that were unable to escape because there was no trap door. And the crazy thing about this plant is I've read that scientists believe that we're looking at evolution in process, that this flower may be in the beginning stages of turning itself into a carnivorous plant, like a pitcher plant. Pretty
That's
cool.
interesting. Really cool. I had wondered about that because I remember seeing, insects, and I had actually assumed it was that it was consuming energy from the bugs, and that you were gonna end on carcasses again, but this time bug carcasses.
Some get away.
Some get away. That's really good. Well, we do have some time now for questions, and we have a bunch of them. There's just a couple of comments. One note that all of these plants can be seen at the Garden in the Woods in Framingham. That was Leslie Turek. Another note that red trillium is also known as wake robin, which I didn't know. And I've heard wake robin. I love that name. And then there was a question about, the harvesting of wild fiddleheads. I mean, we talked about ramps for a minute, which are wild leeks. And I'm seeing like restaurants serving fiddleheads, and you can buy them in some supermarkets. And, are they cultivated, or is it people, picking them in the wild? And, what's the ethics around it in your view, Rene?
So I don't know if they grow them if they cultivate them, but it's the ostrich fern that you would get the fiddleheads for. I think I read somewhere that they're all edible, but don't take me on that. But it's the ostrich fern that's the tasty one. Again, there's a spectrum, right? So either, you can buy all your greens in the supermarket, or you can do a little bit and enjoy nature. See, the thing is when you participate in nature, when you're an active participant and your hands are dirty and you're in the woods year after year, that's when you become intimate with the landscape. These are the people we rely upon at the Nature Conservancy, right? Because they love it so much. We want to protect it. So I'm not a hands-off guy. I don't say, hey, don't ever pick anything. So I always try to say, let's do it ethically, so market the sale of it to markets and restaurants can be wasteful, like this supermarket that I said that has ramps on it, they're all wilty and gross. Nobody's going to buy those. So they're going to be pitched, right? When you do it in the woods, you're only taking a little bit, you eat them right up that night. All right. And there's no waste, right? So with a fiddleheads, if you find a patch of ostrich ferns that are not on a polluted river, or any place nasty.
Good point.
They grow in a round like this, circle. You take one or two, right? And then the rest of the fiddleheads come up and become the beautiful fronds of the ostrich fern. And then the fern can do what it needs to do to stay and live, and everybody's happy. If, basically, Deb, at that point, you're a deer.
You're good. Yeah. So you should know that fiddleheads. So in my family, that was our tradition. Is every spring we'd go picking fiddleheads, and we had a few. Every family has their own little secret spots. We go to our secret spots, and when my kids turned into like, they all were past 18. They turned early 20s. We got a family tattoo of the fiddlehead, because that was like their formative experience of family bonding. So little known fact, fiddlehead. I freaked them out by agreeing. They were, oh my God, they didn't. They thought, first of all, they thought I'd be upset. And then I'd say a family tattoo and you're thinking I'm not doing it. So
now, Deb, just so
you
you know, when I do my walk and talks, and if I run upon a patch of fiddlehead ferns,
you're going to think of my tattoo.
I'm going to tell the story of a family that was so in love with this plant that they all got tattoos of the ostrich fern on their backs.
It's true. I'll send you a photo of it. We actually spent 6 hours in the tattoo parlor as a family. And I went first because I could not imagine letting them do it to my children without knowing what it was going to be like first. I'm sorry if this is too much information, Liz.
I told the story about the little girl getting rolled around and skunk. It's a weird presentation.
You're bringing that out of me. The two truths and a lie kind of thing. So we've got some questions I want to get to. Rana Erickson asks, what does the female Jill flower look like?
All right, so man, I always mean to look this up. All right, and I'm sure somebody will put it in the chat, right? But if you go into the Jack-in-the-pulpits, one is green and one is, you look inside and it's purple. And I'm just going to give you an I don't know on which one it is. So I think so if you're looking at the purple one, you're looking at one of the sexes. And if you're looking at the green one, you're looking at the other one. So it's a little homework for you, Rana. I don't know.
Yeah. There was a Nancy Lebedinsky noted that she's got lots of ostrich ferns and she just takes a few from each plant to eat, and they're very vigorous and can handle a picking with absolutely no harm. So that's good. So I don't feel so guilty. And we always, would leave some. Oh, somebody asked, what about lady slippers? Why didn't you do something on lady slippers? And I would assume it's because they're so rare and hard to find. Could that be?
No, I mean, I've got my preferences. I think lady slippers are beautiful, but I don't know. I think these other plants are rock stars, to be honest with you. I love, the moccasin flowers. They're gorgeous, but
very flashy.
Yeah, they don't really have I don't know. Maybe I'll look it up in Gracie's book. They don't have and they're not the first either. So when I was out there, these are like the first ones. So you have some flowers to look forward to that are coming up, so the lady slippers are next, starflower will be blooming, the Solomon seals, the different columbine are coming out on the rock faces soon. So they're just like, there's a whole new show coming up in the next couple weeks,
We got a couple of questions from Elaine Richardson. She asks, first, are Dutchman's breeches related to bleeding hearts?
Yeah.
You mentioned them, right? And so they are, because they look similar. Yeah.
Yes.
And then how are ants important to peonies?
I heard, everybody's bent down to smell a peony and get a face full of ants, right? Yeah. I don't know if they what do they get? It must be getting the pollen, right? Or the
I actually had heard that they open by walking through, they're getting the nectar, but by walking through, they open the flowers. And
really?
So if you don't have the ants, you'll have peonies whose flowers stay really tight and don't open. It could be a bubomyce. It could be just, it could be, something that's not true, but that's what I heard about ants and peonies.
And I don't do well with like cultivar stuff. Like people ask me questions about like, what tree is this? And I'm like, it is in your yard? And people say, yeah. And I'm like, I'll have no idea. Like, I don't care about planted things. Like if it's not in the woods and if it's not in the wild, like you got to focus on something, so.
Yeah.
So my wife and I, we've been working on our garden. We got some great things, but I don't necessarily know the relationships. All I know is if I go to the nursery and there's a flower out there and it's covered in bees, that's the one I want to buy.
Well, that's a smart idea. So somebody asks, where can we buy native plants?
Yeah, so, all right, so do they have to be native? No. Is it good if they're native? Yes. Just make sure they're not invasive. Do you know what I mean? So everybody loves lilacs. They're coming out next, right? You don't have lilacs marching all through the woods, you know, ruining the place. You know, it's Japanese barberry. Why anybody wants a square hedge of pricker bushes is beyond me. Rip those things out. They're horrible.
Yeah,
all
they're
right?
really bad.
But lilac bushes don't do that. You know, so what I do is, you know, well, first I do what my wife says. All right. And secondly is, you know, she gets the first pick of the flowers. And then I'm like, how about that weird looking white spiky one over there with all the bees? And then I get to take my choose, you know, and then I'll take the bee ones, you know, and yeah, that's how it works. So natives, I'm in the Berkshires. So Ward's Nursery is a good one. Greg Ward is a great guy. He's a friend of mine, and he's really into the native plant stuff. That's a great place. And you just do a little research.
And you just
know, and
ask. Also,
and
just ask. And
yeah, if you go online, you're like, you know, I really love a burning bush. Burning bushes are amazing. Wingy
really
ones,
are.
I really want one. I love the color. Look it up online, and you'll be like, you'll see all sorts of big alerts. Don't plant burning bush. Don't plant burning bush. And then everybody gets mad at me because everybody loves their burning bush, right? But if you're going to plant something, they'll be like, undoubtedly someone's going to tell you, you know what, if you love the color of burning bush, plant staghorn sumac. All right. And the good thing about staghorn sumac, it's going to give you that same color. But when those big fruity, big cone berries come out, you can make tea out of it.
nice,
You know, so
nice.
why would you want burning bush when you can have a nice tea?
We'll have to do this again in the fall and see all the fun fall flowers. Shirley Griffin notes, don't choose non-native plants with berries because then they get spread by birds. And that's like honeysuckle is like everywhere. And the berries actually in honeysuckle give the birds no nutrition at all. It's like junk food for birds, just goes right through them. So it's bad for the birds. It spreads everywhere. It smells nice. Kids like it, but you know, it's again, there's Ron Erickson noted the lady slippers are locally abundant when they're there. They need certain rhizoid support. Hemlock drip zone is where they are in her yard, which is interesting. Douglas Richardson says about the blue cohosh, do you know the species? There's more than one, it seems.
Yeah, black and blue. There's a black cohosh and a blue cohosh. I don't know if it's further divided than that.
And one's supposed to be good for symptoms for menopause.
Yes, yeah. I had a boss that when I was at Bartholomew's Cabo when I was a young pup and I was there, and she said that she took it for child labor too. She said it. She did she did natural childbirth, and I said,
yeah, me too. That was we did as well. We did a tincture. Who knows if it worked?
That's what I said to her. I said, did it work? And she goes, I don't know. I hear child labor's tough, Dad.
You know, it's overbait. No, I did it 3 times. It was okay. You get a prize at the end. So let's see. Let's change the subject. So Vincent DeForno asked, did Native Americans really name the pink moon after the spring blooming pink phlox?
Holy moly. That's an I don't know.
Okay.
Are we capturing that question? I'm sure we can look that one up somewhere.
Yeah. So this is, I think we have to, we really have to finish. This has really been fun. Had really appreciated you, Rene. You're terrific, and really appreciated all the questions. We've gotten to a lot of them, not all of them. My apologies for folks who put messages in the chat. I didn't realize that there were so many sitting there. I have been looking in the Q&A line, and I guess in the chat there's more suggestions of buying native plants and more answers. So feel free to take a look at that. And I just want to thank you, Rene, for sharing your knowledge. I know I learned a lot and had fun. And as we approach our end of our time, do you have any final thoughts that you have to share for us?
I mean, just get outside, right? we all had a tough year. You know, this pandemic touched everybody, everybody. Like, I've been depressed. I haven't been out enough in the woods, you know. I'm like, it's tough. So get outside, you know. Like, I just heard I didn't even realize there was a hermit thrush in that video because I was so focused, but I keyed in on my first hermit thrush yesterday, and it's just amazing. There's so much going on out there, you know. Life abounds, and, you know, take some time, treat yourself, go for a walk in the woods.
I would agree. One of the things I think we've learned overall from the pandemic is just how important nature is to our well-being. And I think a lot about how it's unequally distributed. And there are people in Massachusetts who experienced the pandemic from their apartment or in a city area without green space, and just how tragic that is and challenging. And I'm so pleased to be part of an organization whose, you know, part of our mission is making sure that everyone has access to nature and that we're protecting what we have for future generations. There's just, to me, nothing more important than that. And so thank you, Rene, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your support of the Nature Conservancy. Your support's what makes all of this work possible. So really, thank you. You should know we're going to be sending everyone a follow-up email over the coming days. It'll have links to the resources we talked about today and also a recording of this webinar. If you're enjoying our webinars, feel free to share them with your friends. You can also follow us on social media at conserve_MA on Facebook and Instagram to keep up with our work and to get updates on upcoming virtual opportunities to connect with us. As always, you can see our upcoming webinars and sign up at nature.org/MA webinars. And I just want to thank everyone again for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. And thank you again, Rene. You're fabulous.
Thank you, Deb. Thanks everyone for tuning in.